Jeff, congratulations on your docu-series Before the End, Searching for Jim Morrison.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
No, thank you for carrying this conversation and making this docu-series because it is always funny is because we always accept whatever news the mainstream news actually tell us to, and I never really put a thought further because you always try to trying to dismiss it if it's not on the news, if it's not official, then it can't be true. But you tell us what actually started you off that you wanted to go down this rabbit hole.
Uh, I mean, it's so funny. There's been a real trajectory, throughout my life, that speaks to just that, your question. Um, just to give you like the bullet points, on the trajectory, the timeline, if you will. When I was a real little kid, 3, 4, or 5 years old, somewhere in there, the Doors music was the first I recall hearing, and the Beatles, that really, put the whammy on me. And I was so young, a little kid, I didn't know who Jim Morrison was, or John Densmore, or I don't even know if I knew the band name. I just knew the music. I thought of it as spooky, and eerie, and I would refer to it as Halloween music. Um, and then you flash forward, years later. I'm 18 years old in college, supposed to be attending classes one day, which I did not, thankfully. I'm sure I'm a real role model in that regard. But there was a silver lining in blowing off class that day, because I went into a bookstore and there was "No One Here Gets Out Alive" on the display. Like a moment, and the wheels were the gears were clicking, like, oh yeah, yeah, that band, that those songs, this Halloween music. And I read it in one night. I read it that night, and I was up till like 4 in the morning. And I'll never forget closing the book and saying to myself verbatim under my breath, "No fucking way. There's no way he died on July 3rd, 1971, the way they claim he did." And that was it. And I didn't think a whole lot of it, for a while. But time went on, and I started telling my friends, "I'm going to find Jim Morrison someday." And they'd be like humoring me, "Sure you are, Jeff." And we'd all laugh about it, and that was it. And then years went by, and the next thing you know, in 1996, I'm making inroads to writing a book. That didn't happen. And then we go all the way to 2012, when I dove into what became Before the End, Searching for Jim Morrison. So it's been there all my life, building.
Now, for you personally, what really does fascinate you about Jim Morrison? Is it Jim Morrison himself, or just the search for Jim Morrison is actually what fascinates you?
That's a great question. I've never been asked that before. I would say both, honestly. Certainly the search, speaks for itself. As you said, it's a rabbit hole. I've said that. I've used that term thousands of times regarding this project. It's truly a rabbit hole. As my editor said, the rabbit hole is lined with coincidences. So that's fascinating right there. But yeah, Jim himself. I mean, I feel like Jim was a true original. He came along at a time, an incredible time. The mid '60s, 1960s, which was such a decade of massive upheaval and cultural change. And Jim was one of the beacons right there, along with the Beatles and others. I feel like he was sort of like a walking generation gap, or a microcosm of the '60s. And a friend of his, a high school friend of Jim's, once said to me, he once asked me, why Jim? I mean, I know he was talented and good looking, and all the things you need to be a rock star, but why him? Why Jim? Why not me? And I remember saying, and I like this guy, I said, "Are you really literally asking me, or is this a rhetorical question?" He goes, "No, I really want to know." And so we both sat there for a couple minutes like this, and I went, "Well, put it this way." And I go, "If Elvis was the groin and Dylan was the brain, then Jim was the grain." You get it? You put them together. And the guy literally, like, his eyes got wide. He goes, I get it now. And I was like, shit, that's pretty good. Yeah, I think I get it too. We were both laughing, but I think that's really what it was. Jim was just a completely unique persona in the 1960s, which was filled with, hi, kitty, unique personas. So that's pretty spectacular to stand out like that.
Now, I'm actually amazed because of for your docuseries on how many people that you actually got to talk to with and how you actually convinced them to speak with you. How what I
Yeah,
mean, we're not talking about dozens of people. I think you mentioned like hundreds of people you actually like it's a huge web. How did you pull this off?
I'm still not sure. Maybe you and I can figure it out together today. Uh, I, I, I just kept, what I mean? I just kept at it. In those 12 years, I mean, again, I've been studying the guy since October of '85. So that's now 39 years as of this past October. And then I worked on the documystery for 12 years. Um, and during those 12 years, I connected with literally over 1,000 people. I added it all up. It was absurd. 1,000 people who were connected to Jim in whatever way, from truly intimate lovers or family members, his cousins, Alan Edwards and David Backer, obviously Jim's brother, Andy. I even met with Ann Morrison, even though she's not interviewed in the project, but Andy is. To just people who were tangential acquaintances, through the doors or through his poetry or you name it. And of those 1,000+ people, in the end, no pun intended, I interviewed, I think it was around 130 of them on camera. And obviously, those 130, I couldn't get them all into the 3.5-hour documentary. It would have taken like a 20-hour documentary to get them all into the mix. So that's why there's talk of a director's cut at some point to really get it all in there, So we'll see.
Now, I don't want to spoil anything because the fact is that people should actually watch your docu-series. But with your usual and unusual suspects, and you want to prove there is a Jim Morrison out there, how did you want to create that detective checklist of yours as evidence on who is and who is not Jim Morrison?
That's a great question. Uh, I like the way you very gingerly sort of threaded that needle. That's very apropos. I appreciate it. Again, there's an individual in the project who I refer to as Mr. X. Uh, I've said this on the record. He he allowed me to discover him, shall we say? And it blew the doors off. Pun definitely intended of my consciousness to such a degree that the film, for all intents and purposes, the docu-series, if you will, was complete in late 2016, and that's when he found me and let me find him, and I literally rebuilt the entire documentary from scratch to accommodate him and his storyline. And he knew damn well what the project was about. And he's brilliant and hilarious, and he knew what he was getting into. And I'll just leave it at that. But he changed everything, and it's to this day it still gives me goosebumps. I have goosebumps all up and down my arms just thinking about him. So we all shall be revealed in the doc.
Mr. X actually knew what you were doing this entire time.
Yes. Oh, he's somebody once said about Jim that Jim was, I think, what was the quote? Jim was 3 steps ahead of every move that was being made. This was in No One Here Gets Out Alive when they referred to Bob Dylan's former handler, Bobby Newworth, who was hired to babysit Jim. And Newworth said that cat was hip to every move that was being made. He was always 3 steps ahead of everyone. And the same holds true for Mr. X. He is beyond savvy. Uh, yeah, he knew every move that I was making, and he rolled with it. And I think as one of the people, one of the few people who've seen the full cut of Before the End, told me recently, they said, I think your documystery is going to be a game changer. And they said that they don't think people will ever see Jim Morrison in the same light again after viewing this. So, and Mr. X is a significant part of that.
I'm actually astonished to the fact that how much you actually know Jim Morrison just by watching this series. I was going, I didn't know anything about that about Jim. I didn't know that about Jim. I mean, how do you pull all these little facts and evidences about Jim from? I mean, it almost sounds like you have like a 30-man FBI research team behind you, but I know you don't.
Good in here. No, it's just as yeah. I told someone else recently when I was a little kid. I used to. They didn't call it role playing or cosplaying. Cosplaying. They didn't call it that when I was a young kid. But I would role play as Sherlock Holmes in my mother's backyard with a magnifying glass and a trench coat. I think it was my grandfather's trench coat, and I would sometimes do that. And so I think those investigative sensibilities were there from the jump for me, and I don't know, but yeah, I dug in so hard, and I told everyone. I'll never forget interviewing Jack Holzman, who signed the Doors to Elektra Records, his label. Right as the camera was about to go live, I said, "Hey, Jack," and he goes, "Yeah," and I said, "I want you to think outside the box on this. Go off script." He goes, "Whoa, what do you mean?" And I said, "I don't want the usual answers, the canned answers. I appreciate everything you've ever said, but for this, I want you to really, really give me the not just the truth, but the real truth, because there's a distinction." And he was like, I'll never forget. He was all sort of flustered, like, "Oh, okay." And he was great, and we went with it. But that was the whole point, is to get beyond the controlled narratives and get beyond the canned answers that we've all had for over 50 years. It's like, I'm tired of it. I'm tired of the official story because it keeps changing and
Mhm.
morphing, but it always sticks at the end of the day like glue to the controlled narrative. All the talking points. Oh, Jim died. He's dead. We know he's dead. It's done. Leave it alone. So it's like Jim said, wake up. Like think for yourself. Question authority. Question your own authority.
Now, 12 years on a project like this is a very long journey. What actually kept you going? Like, what makes you like wake up and say, you know what? I'm quitting. Let bygones be bygones. But you seem like, no, I'm gonna move forward. I'm gonna find Jim.
I again, it just it sounds, even now it sounds sort of strange to hear myself think it, let alone say it. But this has become my life's work. I didn't plan for it. If someone would have told me, you're going to spend the better part of 39 years researching this guy and 12 years, literally full time, 12 years creating a docu-series, I used to joke, oh, I would have been like, oh, no way. But knowing me, I probably would have been like, okay, what the hell, let's do it. I had to do it. Like it's something that just meant the world to me. Jim was like a beacon to me, as he was for millions of fans. I'm no special case. I mean, but in my late adolescence and early adulthood, which is rough for anybody usually, he was like a lighthouse in a dark, stormy sea. And I'll always be grateful for that. And his example of, as I just said, question everything. Don't take things at face value. So it's ironic that this controlled narrative has risen up around him in general, and his death in particular, his alleged death in particular. I think he would get a real kick out of that because, as he said himself, don't take it at face value or the carrot that's being dangled in front of you. You know, knock that carrot aside and do your own thinking and your own research and come to your own conclusions, you know.
Was there anything during this entire journey for yourself that I don't want to say regret, but you would have done something differently?
Uh, well, yeah, I would have. I did everything in reverse. Real brilliant there. Again, I had no clue this was going to take 12 years of my life, you know, uh, consecutively. If I could have gone back, the one thing I would change, I suppose, is I would have had the seed money, the financing in place from the jump. Not the way I did it piecemeal, which was another reason why it took so damn long. You know, I'll always be grateful to the Kickstarter backers. There was a successful Kickstarter in the very early days of the project, but that only went so far. You know, this was a Herculean project. I'd only ever made one doc before this, which was a tiny UFO documentary that I wasn't even going to release. I was just going to put it on YouTube, and I shot it like in a punk rock style, and a company wanted to put it out. I was like, well, what? So yes, I would have the financing in front, you know, from the jump, rather than having to eke it out piecemeal for 12 years. It might have gotten done a lot sooner, but who knows? I have no regrets ultimately. You know, I'm very grateful.
Now, Jeff, since this journey has come to an end, supposedly, at least on film, was this end satisfying to you, or you think you're still going to, there's more chapters to be written?
Uh, that's a great question. And yes, literally, there are more chapters to be written, and I've written them. I've spent the last 5+ years parallel to before the end, working on a book, almost like a memoir of sorts. Uh, my connection to this whole thing, and honestly, just filling in all the granular details that I couldn't fit into before the end. And the book is called 127 Fascination, Jim Morrison Decoded. And the book is complete, and I'm in the process of getting it published to get it out there. So it will not take another 12 years. Uh, but yes, there's so much more. I'm very proud of Before the End, but with 127 Fascination, I can really get granular into those fine point details about everything, you know, especially Jim's formative years, which are largely glossed over, you know, in the countless projects that have been done through the years. With all due respect, his formative years have just, you know, just like a little footnote, and then onto the rock stardom, you know. So with my work, you know, I'm looking at the full calibration of his life and supposed death.
Well said, Jeff. Let me wrap it up with one last question because, audiences, especially Morrison fans, are going to have a chance to watch this around the world, and people are really going to discuss the heck out of your film and debate, what the truth and false out of it. But what is the one most important take you hope they walk away with after watching this docuseries?
Um, I honestly, I just hope they see beyond the black leather pants, you know, beyond the icon. Jim was so many things, and he did have the black leather pants, and he was an icon. He is an icon, but there's so much more to him than just the rock stardom, you know, the rock singer, the rock god, if you will. I hope that they see through that to his true humanity, who he was as a real flesh and blood human being. And on that note, I also hope that if nothing else, I hope that they take away from Before the End, Searching for Jim Morrison, that there is a real distinction between the truth and the real truth, you know, and that's something I was never taught as a kid. I learned that organically as I went along. You know, the truth is almost like a cliche. You know, the truth could be anything from something that was put out in a press release, you know, and people take it at face value, you know, and that begins to control a narrative. And again, I believe that's what's been in place since Bill Siddons, the former Doors manager, released his prepared statement in 1971 about Jim dying in a sealed coffin and this kind of stuff, you know. I hope that they just remember there's the truth and there's the real truth, and the real truth is what I'm after.
And that's why people will need to watch this docu-series. Jeff, thank you very much for carrying this conversation about your docu-series. I don't want to wait 12 years for your book, but I'm glad it's coming out soon. So thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
Jake, and thank you for having me on so much.
Hey,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you. Bye now.